The following is a look at the killers of Dead by Daylight, and any real-world equivalents they might have. Let's continue. Kenneth Chase, aka The Clown. I finally entered the fog just after this fat, horrible clown. How apt. And with this character, there is no more messing about. He is a serial killer, pure and simple. He's not possibly a serial killer, he's not merely technically a serial killer, and he's not a serial killer with caveats, institutional or isolationist. The Clown has killed at least 5 people with a cooling off period between the murders as a rogue and independent element within wider society. Is he based off anyone? The obvious answer is yes. John Wayne Gacy would occasionally dress up as a clown for children's parties, and forever ruin clowns for everyone. But I want something deeper than just the superficial appearance, and I think there are other similarities I'll get to in due course though. But firstly, what's the story of Kenneth Chase? Back in the USA, and we get a specific birth date, 1932. It's also the date his mother died in childbirth, and the father quietly resented the son for it. I don't get the impression the father character was violent, but he was very neglectful and probably an alcoholic. I thought it was possibly the only instance where an alcoholic hasn't been an abusive tyrant, but to jump ahead a little into Chase's tome, we see he hid from his father as a child. The father shouted at him and was cruel, possibly even physically abusive. The victim stalked in the tome was even a sort of stand-in for Chase's dad. But I also don't think in my entire project did I once see single dad as part of the trauma history. The closest I can think of is maybe Rose West, whose mother was so depressed she was barely in her life, and even underwent electroshock therapy when pregnant. Also, Rose West's father was a much less than savoury individual. What isn't so rare is the next development in Kenneth's childhood, capturing and killing small animals as an infant zoo sadist. He started with birds and would take the feather from each kill before stepping up to larger game, squirrels, raccoons, and dogs. And this continued after he left school, so I can count him as an adult zoo sadist as well. He took trophies from the animals he killed, and I don't know if other serial killers did this as well. There are many killers that start with abusing animals, but Richard Chase, Keith Jesperson, and Peter Curtin were all zoo sadists as both children and adults. These 3 have very little else in common, from schizophrenic criminal insanity, 90s mixed tactical, and early 20th century German depravity. Kenneth Chase and Richard do share a surname, but I seriously doubt he was a reference to the Vampire of Sacramento, and instead just a bit of foreshadowing of what Ken would be doing in the fog. But I want to talk about the torturing and killing of small animals. I don't think there's a more alarming signifier that something is very wrong with your child. One theory as to why is its displaced aggression, a need to feel like they have power over something to counter the feeling that something has power over them. So they make something smaller suffer. It's the darkest manifestation of what has been called conduct disorder. I'll come back to that. In 1954, aged 22, Kenneth Chase killed a man, and a few months later Chase's father found the severed finger of the victim. Chase fled, and presumably the police trail went cold. Taking trophies from humans is another true crime tag, and body parts are especially gruesome, but it does happen. We discussed it in the Hag's entry, but here's a quick recap. The truly dreadful Louis Garavito sometimes took the toes of his victims, Bundy and Kemper would sometimes take the entire head, and Fred West, husband of Rose, also took the fingers of some of his victims. The fingers were never found. Kenneth Chase has already been associated with some of the most depraved names of my project, and we're not done yet. After fleeing his town, Chase was homeless for perhaps a few months before joining the circus. Supposedly, Donald Gaskins did this when he escaped from prison, but I don't know for sure if that's true. And Gaskins, sometimes called Pee-wee, was short as opposed to Chase, who's not only tall but signed on as the circus strongman, and is also quite the chonk. Circuses and clowns show up again and again in horror. The insincerity of the performers, the uncanny vibe to it all. A circus is only in a given location to get as much money as it can from the locals, and then it moves on. Supposedly, this is how a psychopath operates. He plays out a certain locale, then moves on. But I notice serial killers, at least, often have a preferred hunting ground, even a lair, as opposed to moving from place to place. But killers like Otis Toole and Henry Lucas, Carl Panzram and Terry Rasmussen all travelled quite a bit, and often gave false names. Rasmussen in particular was dubbed the Chameleon Killer for all his aliases. As for Kenneth Chase, he took the name Jeffrey Hawk and would travel with his new family for perhaps 10 years? Hawk gave in to many vices. His game add-ons include gin bottles, cigar boxes, pornography, and other trophies and curiosities. The base lore references an excess of drinks, junk food, and drugs. With that many empty gin bottles, I think we can assume Hawk is an alcoholic. Panzram, Warnos, Nielsen, Dharma, and again Garavito were also alcoholics. This kind of impulsive, reckless, and irresponsible pleasure-seeking is something often associated with antisocial personality disorder. It's also worth mentioning at this point that John Wayne Gacy was also diagnosed with ASPD. This separates the clown from the Doctor, who was more about research and keeping a clear head and good impressions. Sort of, not really. The Doctor's mania drove him to desire power, control. It made him curious and even giddy. But even when the clown laughs, there's nothing gleeful about him. And there's nothing professional or particularly goal-oriented about this character. Unlike the Doctor, the clown does have the ASPD vibe. His tome starts with him losing a chase to a raccoon, and we can see his inappropriate anger, and he fashions a cruel accident for another circus performer, showing a total disregard for safety, as well as deficits in empathy, remorse, guilt, all of it. Within the tome, we also get glimpses into some unruly activity as a child that wasn't mentioned in the base lore, including misbehaving at school and throwing dog crap at a car. I think we can add juvenile delinquency to the growing list of tropes. Even more telling, Hawk shows resentment for his old school teacher and for some locals from his town, blaming others for problems in his life. It's like the writer took a note of ASPD and showed us the symptoms as they ticked the boxes. I don't think that's a leap at all, and I feel comfortable diagnosing this fictional character with antisocial PD. The tome ends with the clown torturing and killing a man, and the base lore also referenced torture. But one day, however long after Mustached Man's fate was sealed, the clown got sloppy and fell asleep, and a victim escaped. It reminds me of the time Louis Garavito fell asleep and set fire to a sugarcane field that led to his capture. Alcohol was involved with both the fictional and real-world case. The clown once again fled, and this would have been roughly in 1964, aged 32. He then stalked the country for an indeterminate period of time, killing and moving on. I'd say the clown is in his 50s? He must have roamed the States until the mid-80s, before that familiar fog enveloped him. Much like Tommy Lynn Sells going coast to coast, or again, like Israel Keyes. It begs the question, how many has the clown killed? There was his first kill in his hometown, the trapeze artist and the moustached man in the tome, and both the redhead and the tattooist of the iridescent add-ons. 5 kills with a cooling off period between them. And then we have the fingers on his ring. Perhaps there's some overlap there, i.e. one of the fingers on his ring could have been the moustached man or something. But it's clear Chase has killed more than 5 people, and he was at large for over 30 years as an impulsive secondary psychopath. This immediately puts him as having a very long criminal career, beaten by, oddly enough, Donald Gaskins and 4 others, and beating out Nanny Doss. Okay, let's say the clown is currently in his 40s, and it's just that the gin, burgers and cigars have taken their toll, and the makeup probably doesn't help. He would have roamed until the 1970s before the entity picked him up, but 20 years at large is still a very long time. There's no mention or allusion to sexual assaults, and I didn't expect there would be. I think there are some boundaries the video game developers didn't want to cross, and sex and video games have always had an awkward history. But if there's one killer who strikes me as a sex offender besides those 2, it's the clown. With or without his Freudian excuse, the clown truly is an irredeemable monster. And the lore references men, women, young, old. Just what is our imagination supposed to do with that? Although this slightly differentiates the clown from some of the names already mentioned who targeted almost exclusively young men. Indeed, most serial killers have a type. I don't think it's unreasonable to put the kill count as high as 50, maybe even 100. And 100 isn't totally unreasonable. Bundy may well have killed over 100, and 100 has been speculated for Alcala, Panzram, Jesperson, Cottingham, Watts, and again Donald Gaskins. Certain names are recurring in this video, I see. Furthermore, Luis Garavito, amongst others, are confirmed to have killed more than 100 people. If David King was a ringer for ASPD, the clown is the poster child. All of the above and that self-destructive impulsivity I associate with Factor 2 psychopathy, or sociopathy, or some approximation thereof. The clown has that nasty and scummy and vile aspect to his character that's lacking in the others. He's a painted thug. More importantly, as a young child he showed serious conduct disorder. As I was saying earlier, conduct disorder is an early warning sign of ASPD in children. It can include things like defiance towards authority figures, vandalism, stealing, the usual little scumbag actions. But perhaps conduct disorder is most famously known for including the McDonald triad: zoo sadism, arson, and bedwetting. Falling out of favour in recent years, and I kind of disproved it in my project, the triad nevertheless includes conduct disorder actions. Supposedly, ASPD can't be diagnosed at all without some history of conduct disorder. Could the clown be a narcissist? I don't know. He doesn't fit some of the criteria. Yes, he's rather attention-seeking and grandiose and disempathic, but I don't get the impression he has a pathological false self or megalomaniacal tendencies. I'll go into more detail when we get to a relevant case. Although, there is a dead mother arc, which is fertile ground for making a narcissist, and that's not to say someone with antisocial personality disorder can't also have narcissistic personality disorder. These disorders, particularly Cluster B, have a high rate of comorbidity. Perhaps most relevant is the clown and the image he portrays to the world. The clown taps into that idea that someone bright and colourful can be very dangerous and deadly, just like colourful vipers. I'm not really sure what I like in a Dead by Daylight killer. Huntress didn't do it for me. A skillful, direct and brutal playstyle that does it for many, but not me. The Clown, though, I played a lot of. We were both the new boys after all. His ability is to use bottles of slowdown gas to trap and herd his targets. I like watching survivors react to what I'm doing, and it makes me feel in control. That is, until they just pre-drop the pallet and I'm worried about their 3 mates doing gens. It took many of us all a while to realise that the Clown really isn't as competitive as we first thought. And despite feeling especially devious when things go according to plan, you feel naked without some serious slowdown. As for his update with the Afterpiece Antidote, it's rather tricky to use effectively, and you never want the survivors to use it. I've seen some creative builds and ways to use it effectively, but Clown remains in the shallow end of DBD killer competitiveness. Still, it is a lot of fun, isn't it? His theme music was the first thing I heard when I loaded the game for the first time, and I was aware of the latest addition to the Rogues Gallery, and even back then I had a keen interest in true crime and recognised the signs. The Clown just has a presence and a horror to him other characters don't have. But that's not a butterfly knife, I mean, come on.
The dime a dozen backstabbing scumbags, like you! Ow! No offense.